Hi, welcome to the video. Today we're going to learn about JavaScript slice and splice array methods. Now these two methods are a little bit tricky because depending on the number of arguments used, the behavior will vary. So hopefully by the end we'll get a good grasp of each case and even look at some weird cases that it's good to know. Alright, so before we begin, I'm going to show you a neat visual trick. You know how each index is associated with a value, right, in the JavaScript array? So you see here 0, 1, and 2. But I want you to mentally think of the index as pointing to the location right before the value, right? So before 0 was here, but now think of it as pointing to this little space here. Same for 1 and 2. It's a little bit weird, but bear with me and you'll see why it can be useful. Okay, so let's look at slice with no arguments. We see we have declared an array A, B. We perform the slice method with no arguments, and what you have to remember for this case is that B will always be a copy of the original array. Okay, and same thing. Important to note that for slice, the original array is never changed or mutated. Okay, so you can do whatever, you can put whatever arguments into the slice method, but A, right, the original array will never change, right? And yeah, so take some time to look at this. It's quite straightforward, obviously, because again, it's just a copy, right? So with one argument, we see why that little mental trick earlier was useful, because if we assume that this argument, right, this one argument points to that space in between the values, so 0, 1, 2, and 3, which is right here. What you have to know for the one argument case for slice is that, well, you just take all the values to the right side of that index, right? So you see the blue here, that's what gets returned to the B array. And again, remember, for slice, A will never change, right? The original array will never change. So for two arguments, you see here, it's useful again because 0, 1, 2, that's the index location right here, and 4 is right here. So when it's sliced and it's two arguments, you can think of it as like a net, right? One catches the first index location, and the second argument catches the end location, and what's returned is the values in between those two spots. So in this case, 3 and 4 are set to B, and as we expect, A is unchanged. Okay, so let's look at splice now. Splice with no arguments. Well, it's going to be the same result every time, right? So B will always be empty, and A will never change if there's no arguments. Pretty straightforward. But it's quite unordinary because splice is meant to change the original array, right? But in this case, there are no arguments, so this is the expected outcome. Alright, so for splice one argument case, see here we have 3 as the only argument in the splice method. What you have to know is that if we use our little mental trick again, right, we point to the third location, and whatever is to the right side gets returned as B, and what's on the left side gets returned as A. And this is an important point in the video because this is the main difference from splice, right? In that the original array, in this case A, mutates or changes, right, with the application of the splice method. Okay, let's look at the splice two argument case. In this case, the first argument, so there's 2 right here, using a little trick again, it's going to point to the second location, right? 0, 1, and 2, it's right here. And then the purpose of the second argument is to grab the amount of arguments, right, by its own value. So 2 here, we're going to get 1, 2, right? And you grab those 2 values and then it's returned to B. Okay, and what's left of A, remember Splice changes the original array, is you can think of it as a remainder, right? So again, to go over again, so 2, we're pointing to this location, we're gonna grab, right, 2 values right here, 3 and 4, that gets returned as B, right, this variable here, and what's left, the remainder, is A, right? So it's still pretty straightforward. Takes some time to look at this image if it doesn't make sense. Essentially, you know, again, we're just grabbing these 2 values, and then what's left is in the original array is the remainder. Okay, so for the 3 or more arguments case, look how many arguments we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we see the first argument serves the same purpose, leading us to the location of action, and then the second argument, this 2 right here, grabs that many values, 3 and 4 here, and that gets returned to B. That's fine, but what you have to know is that for the remaining arguments, so arguments 3, 4, 5, and 6, they get inserted into where these were spliced out, right? So previously there was a 3 and 4 here, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but well, what's the splice method did is that it replaced this 3 and 4 with these values, right? So even if these values went on forever, like you know, 150 or something, that will just get inserted, added here, and then at the end there's 5, right? Because this was in the original array, and the splice did not reach that point. So again, take some time to look at the image, and hopefully that made sense. Okay, so let's look at what happens when there are negative arguments in the slice and splice method. So let's look at slice first. We have 3 and we have -1. So what do? Well, we can actually apply that little trick again, but backwards. Okay, so imagine where my mouse is, 0, -1. Boom, it's this location right here. So we can just do the same thing. Because there are 2 arguments, we can just grab whatever's in between, and in this case it's just 1 value, it's 4, it's returned as returned to B, and okay, the same thing applies for slice. The original array does not change. Okay, so let's look at a splice case now. If there are negative arguments, like for example this -4 here, again we can just do the same thing, right? Count backwards, 0, 1, 2, 3, and -4 here. So it will just point to this location, and same as any splice 2 argument case, the second argument will just grab that many values, right, and put them in B. And splice does change the array. And how does it change? Well, it's what's left after I splice the 2 and 3 out. It's just 1, 4, and 5. Okay, so basically this means just count backwards, but the same behavior still applies. Alright, so let's look at some weird cases. Okay, so let's look at slice first. One weird case is if the first argument is larger than the second argument, and what you have to remember is that it just won't work. Okay, so this value has to be smaller than this value for slice to get anything. Okay, so it does not work if it's crossed like this, and B will be empty. Alright, so let's look at what happens if the second argument of splice is negative. Okay, normally if this was positive, we would count towards the right. You know, earlier in the video we did that. We're in a splice and 2 argument case. But if this second argument is negative, it doesn't work. Okay, so it doesn't do what you expect, counting to the left. Again, it just won't work. And this actually is equivalent as saying splice with no arguments.